Well, hi, everybody. Welcome to unit number 2 of the Lunch and Learn series, and look forward to working with you today on an interesting topic around how to coach remotely, because obviously, like everything else, it's more of the same, but you've got to do things slightly differently. So I'm going to talk to you about that today. So I'll just share my screen and then we'll get stuck into the process. Now, you can see, obviously, 2 weeks ago, we looked at managing performance remotely, and there's a little bit I wanted to catch up on today, which is that 5 conversations framework. And I want to spend a bit of time doing that just before we sort of launch into the coaching aspect, because I thought it was critically important. One of the things I strongly suggested that you do from last week, as you might recall, in fact, it was your homework, was to start to organize these one-on-one catch-ups, even, of course, done remotely. And I think this is extremely important. Now, of course, the first question that comes to mind, people say, well, what are we going to talk about? So that's what I want to just touch on with the 5 conversations framework. All right, so let's launch into our session. And remember, your homework last time was to improve on your one-on-one communication channels. And of course, if you haven't got them up and running, you should. Now, just to revise, we're not talking about huge amounts of time here. We're talking about a 20-minute check-in with each individual team member once every, say, 3 weeks, which I don't think is a huge ask. And I think it'll make a huge difference. And if you were working in the workplace, I'd be saying the same thing. In other words, have your one-on-ones on a regular basis, but it's actually even more important remotely. So that was the homework, and that sets a nice platform or framework, if you like, for you to start to work on your understanding, your trust, and a whole bunch of other things that are necessary when working remotely. So we looked at that, and what I didn't get to last time, I just ran out of the time, is the 5 conversations framework. Now, this is a very good tool to use for your one-on-ones, because as I said before, people often say, well, what do we talk about? And of course, if you don't have something to talk about, it usually descends into a conversation about the current work that's on. Now, I would assume you'd be having that conversation anyway with people, so that's not what I'm on about here. So let's have a look at the 5 conversations framework. You'll notice that on the left-hand side, you've got 5 months. So 1 conversation a month. So whether this is once every 3 weeks or once every 4 weeks, doesn't matter, as long as it continues to happen. And for each month, there is in the middle column there a theme, and that's the theme that you will talk about during that month. Now, these are all developmental conversations. So this is all about the person rather than the task. And over on the right-hand side, you can see, of course, there's some content around what you're going to talk about. So let me just briefly take you through this and explain what these conversations are all about and how you might use them in your regular check-ins. So the climate review conversation, month 1, is, of course, has nothing to do with the weather, but everything to do with the morale, job satisfaction, and communication that's going on in your team at the time. Now, that's important. Now, obviously, if you're working remotely, you don't get to see everything. And this is why it's extremely important to have a climate review conversation. Now, the very first question that you'll ask in a climate review conversation is this: on a scale of 1 to 10, 10's high, 1's low, what is your current job satisfaction? How would you rate your current job satisfaction? Now, you might say, well, why am I asking that? Well, regardless what number the person gives you, so let's assume, for example, that they give you a 6 out of 10. Then it opens the door for a conversation around why is it 6? Because obviously it's not 10. So why is it a 6? Now, this is a far more effective way of getting someone to talk about their current job satisfaction than it would be if you just sat down with someone and said, how's your job satisfaction? And they said, great. And that's the end of that. So by asking them to give you a number and then to ask them to tell you what that number is, you're getting more information coming back. Now we understand that job satisfaction ebbs and flows depending on what's happening in the organization. There'll be a lot of issues around that. And we accept that. So 1 minute it could be a 5, the next day it could be a 6, the next day it could be a 7. And of course, we all know that, and our own job satisfaction ebbs and flows as well. But what you're doing is you're creating, or you're collecting a little bit of data, a snapshot in time, if you like, of where people are at, and more importantly, why they have rated as such. And then you can talk to them about, for example, if they say it's a 6, you might say to them, well, do you think there's any chance of it getting to a 7? Because don't assume that if someone rates it a 6, it can actually get to a 7. That might be as good as it gets in their mind. So ask them whether you think it could ever get from a 6 to a 7, and let's assume they say yes. Then you might then say, well, what do I need to do, if anything, or not do, that might help you go from a 6 to a 7? You see what you're doing? You're having a really important conversation around how you can actually help get more from that individual. And then, of course, you can talk about some other matters as well. So that's the climate review conversation. And then month 2 is a very pleasant conversation, because what you're talking about essentially there are people's strengths and talents. So instead of going straight for the jugular and talking about what people are not doing well, let's start talking about what people actually do well. And that's what the strengths and talents conversation is all about. Because the idea is, of course, if you can unearth what someone's strength is, you can perhaps harness and utilize it more so than would be the case. Now, this is even more applicable in a remote environment, of course. So, because, of course, there's a little bit more freedom and latitude in terms of how people do their work. Now, it's not a good idea to ask people what their strength is. That's not the opening question, because if you ask that, of course, people get coy and don't bother going there. The question to ask to get this conversation moving is simply this: what's the one thing that you enjoy most about your job? Now, I'm hoping there's something there, of course, otherwise it's a bit of a problem, but what's the one thing that you enjoy most? That's the key question. Now, whatever they say, and it may not be a mystery to you, or it might be a surprise, it doesn't matter. But whatever they say is actually a strength, because we do know from research that there's a high correlation between what people enjoy and what people are good at. All right. So that basically means that if you can identify what people enjoy, it's likely that it's based on the 3P principle. People tend to practice what they prefer, and they ultimately become proficient in it. So ultimately, the idea is then to have a conversation around how you might help that person exercise what they enjoy the most, more so in the work that they're currently doing, because there's a very good chance that they do that very well. So it's a great way to open up a conversation about people's talents and strengths. Now, conversation 3 is very much around the traditional performance type conversation around opportunities for growth. Now, I don't believe this is a good idea, particularly online, for you to sit there and evaluate what people need to work at. That's not what this is about. You actually forewarn people about these conversations so that it gives them a chance to think about it. But basically, you ask people to come to that next conversation, that next check-in, with one area that they'd like to work on for improvement over the next 6 to 12 months. All right. So the onus of accountability is back on the individual. It's not on you. And that's the important thing. So, just ask them, what's the one area that you'd like to work on in the next 6 to 12 months? Now, if you forewarned them, it's likely that they'll have something that they'll put on the table. Now, if you agree with that, then of course, just agree and then talk about it in terms of examples and illustrations and so forth. If you disagree, in other words, they bring something up and you think there's a glaring error over here, then by all means, you can say to the person, well, look, there's one other thing that I think might be worth considering, and then put it on the table. So what you're doing here essentially is to make the other person accountable for their own development over a period of time. All right. Now, you don't have to resolve that at this stage, because conversation 4 is a learning and development conversation. So out of conversation 2, which is strengths and talents and opportunities for growth in conversation 3, there's likely to be some learning and development needs that have come out of that, how we can capitalize on people's strengths and how we might minimize their weaknesses. So what conversations 4 is about is pretty much working out what can be done to help develop that person. Now, that's not necessarily about online training courses either, although it may well be some. It could well be just simply a case of you coaching them, which is what we're going to talk about today. Or it could be a case of you buddying them up with somebody else in the team. Or it could be a case of you explaining something in more detail. So there's a range of possibilities there that fall into that area of learning and development. So don't think of learning and development as necessarily sending people off to training courses, although of course that's part of it. Now, conversation 5, which is innovation and continuous improvement. The difference between 4 and 5 is that conversation 4 is about the person's development, how they can develop themselves, whereas conversation 5 is how the workplace can be improved. Now, bear in mind, we're talking about a remote workplace at the moment, so this could be perhaps just the modes of communication. It could be how to make the getting the jobs done that require done more efficiently and effectively. There's a range of things open, but once again, I think it's very important to ask that person to bring something to that conversation, and not because obviously if you sit there and you say, well, what are some areas for improvement in our workplace? You might just get a blank stare across the Zoom screen or whatever methodology you're using. So ask people to think about it before they come to that conversation. Now, not everything that's brought up in that conversation, of course, is going to be gold, but I guarantee there'll be a couple of good ideas. And of course, if you can implement them fairly quickly, then your credibility goes up, the morale goes up, people think they're being listened to, trust goes up, everything happens. So you might say to me, well, what happens when we get to the end of the 5 conversations? What's conversation 6? Well, conversation 6 is you go back to the beginning again. So it just cycles through, because you can then talk to them, if you're a member, of course, and they might say to you, well, I rated my job satisfaction as 6 last time, and now it's a 7. Well, obviously that's a useful conversation to have, or it's gone from a 6 to a 3. Okay, what's going on? So you go through those topics again. So the idea is, if you can get through 2 rounds of the 5 conversations a year, you're doing well. And I can assure you, it'll make all the difference in the world in terms of your productivity. Absolutely, no doubt. So there you are. That's a framework that I developed that might be of use to you. Now, what are we doing today? Well, I'm actually going to give you a personal coaching session. So what I need you to do is to be prepared to write down some information. So if you've got a pen and a pad there, it's probably easy to write with a pen and a pad in this case, rather than on the computer screen tapping away while you're listening to me. So you need to have a piece of paper and a pen. So grab a piece of paper and a pen, please. And I'm going to basically give you a personal coaching session. And the reason I'm doing that, of course, is to show you how highly effective this methodology is that I'm giving you. And I'm doing this, of course, remotely. And of course, you can do the same thing with your people. You'll find it is extremely powerful. So grab a pen, grab a piece of paper. Don't fudge on this one, because you need to see the evidence firsthand that it actually works. And the best way to do that is for you to see it in terms of your own issues. Now, of course, I'm going to talk about the GROW model, GROW, and I'll explain what it stands for, where it came from, when you can use it, and so forth. And that'll take us through, of course, to the end of the session. But ultimately, there are several different coaching methodologies out there. This is the one I prefer, and I think you'll find it's very easy to use. And I'll illustrate that by giving you that coaching session that I mentioned before. Okay, so we're ready to go. Now, what I want you to do is simply this. Now, I want you to think about an issue that you are facing at work currently. Okay. Now, when I say an issue, I'm talking about something that's not working out. Maybe a client's not following through on a proposal you sent them, or perhaps, there's one of your team members is giving you a hard time, or maybe you're not communicating with your boss the way you'd like to. I'm sure you've got issues, and if you haven't, then you've got a pretty great workplace, I have to say. So it could be interpersonal, it could be a productivity issue, a career issue, it could be anything. Now, I want to say this to you, you will not be sharing this with anybody. So please don't think for a minute that you will be sharing the content of this. In other words, I want you to select something that you genuinely would like to resolve, okay? Now, the second thing about this is that I want you to make this a difficult exercise for me. I want you to get me to earn my money. So I am actually going to, I'm going to, stop sharing in a moment, and you'll just see my mug on the screen. I want you to pick some topic that is very difficult to resolve. In other words, I want you to give me something that's really, really challenging, right? Something challenging. And what I want you to do, the first thing that I want you to write down on your piece of paper that you have in front of you, hopefully right now, is I'd like you to give it a score out of 10. So all you've got to do is write a number from 10 to 1 in terms of your level of optimism about resolving the problem. Now, if it's a 9, then could I ask you to pick another one because it's too easy? If you rate your problem a 9, then you're saying all I have to do is something and it's fixed. I want tough ones. I want you to make me work for my money. Okay. Give me a tough one. You can have a personal issue if you want. I don't, if there's issues going on the home front, not a problem. You can use that as well. But I want you to think of something. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask you a series of questions. And as I ask you these questions, now obviously online, if we were one-on-one, I would ask you these questions and you'd answer, and we'd move on to the next question and so forth. But obviously, because we've got a group of people in this session, I can't do that. So to substitute for that face-to-face interaction, I'm asking you to write the answers down. I don't want an essay. I just want a simple answer for each question that I ask you. And this way it gets you to think through the problem, right? So you must write an answer down. And the other thing is that when we finish this, you will see the pattern of questioning and you'll understand the methodology of how GROW works. All right, are we ready? So I'll just stop sharing for the moment because that's probably a little distracting. Okay. All right. So what I'd like you to do on your screen, sorry, now you've written a number down. All right. Now, what I want you to do is I want you to write a capital G. So just write a capital G under the number. All right. So just follow my directions here. It'll all make sense when we get through this. Now, underneath the G, I want you to put a number 1. All right, so G and then number 1. Now I'm going to ask you a question, and what I want you to do is to write a brief answer to the question about your issue. Bearing in mind, you're not going to share it with anybody. Ready to go? Okay, question 1. Here it is. How long has this issue been going on for you? That's question 1. I'll just pause for a little while, give you a chance to write your answers down, of course, as if you were in the room and we were talking. Question 2. So underneath that answer, just put a 2 and then write this answer down when I ask you the question. Question 2 is, what is the ideal outcome for this issue? Now, obviously, I don't know what it is I'm coaching you on, but for you to achieve the ideal outcome, what will that look like? Can you just write down in a few words what an ideal outcome will look like for you resolving this issue? Okay, question 3, and again, you write question 3 underneath. Question 3 is this: how will you know that you're making progress? So what will be the indicator? So if it's interpersonal, it might be something that someone says, or if it's work related, something gets done. How will you actually know that you're making progress towards your goal? That's question 3. Okay, now what I'd like you to do at this stage is draw a line under the answer for question 3, because what I'm trying to do here is show you the methodology, right? So I'm trying to show you how it all works. So draw a line under it, and then underneath that line, in capital letters, write the letter R. So you had a G at the top, and now you've got an R. And then underneath the R, I'd like you to write down the number 4. All good? Okay. So for question 4, I want to ask you this question. What is the main barrier getting in the way of you resolving this issue? Remember, I'm asking you for the main barrier. There's probably several, but I'm asking you for the main barrier. Question 5. Question 5 is this: how are you actually feeling about this issue? Now, I'm assuming it's not, bursting with excitement, but what are you feeling about this at the moment? How are you feeling about this issue? Could I just ask you to write down a word or words that might describe your feeling about this issue? Now, question 6 underneath 5, of course, is I want to ask you this question. What are some of the symptoms that are going on that are impacting, what, I don't know what the issue is, of course, but what are some of the symptoms? What are some of the things that are going on? Is there tension in the room? Is there, what, how would you know there was an issue? See if you can answer that one. That's question 6. Okay, now draw a line underneath, please, so that we're at the stage now where we've now done 2 sets of questions. There's 6 questions that I've asked you. Draw a line under it. And underneath that line, I want you to write the letter O, large letter O. And underneath the O, I would like you to write down the number 7. Okay. Okay, so this is question 7. I'm asking you this question. What have you tried so far to resolve this issue? Now, if you haven't tried anything, just write nothing. But I'm asking you, what have you tried to resolve this issue? That's question 7. I'm assuming, obviously, it hasn't been effective, but I'm asking you that question to start things moving in the right direction. Now, question 8. So underneath that answer there, this is question 8. All right. So what is another option open to you that you haven't tried? So if you had to select another option that was open to you to resolving this issue, what would it be? That's question 8. Now, question 9, and underneath that one is, I'd like to ask you, what support could you call upon that might help you? So, for example, it could be a friend, or it could be a boss, or it could be even professional services. What support could you call upon to help you resolve this issue? That's question 9. So draw a line under that so that we've now got 9 answers done. And underneath the line, I want you to write a capital W. And now I'm going to ask, and you can see a pattern here, I'm going to ask you 3 more questions, and then we're done. So this, underneath the W, will be question 10. And I'm asking you this question. Based on our discussion today, and obviously if we were talking, we would be having that discussion. Based on our discussion today, what do you think would be the right course of action to take now? So this is where the rubber meets the road. What is the course of action that you think you could take right now? Which is question 10. Question 11. Question 11 is, who will you call upon that might be able to help you resolve this issue right now? So as soon as you leave here, who could you call upon to help you resolve this issue? Now, question 12 is, what is the one simple thing that you can do right now that'll move you in the right direction? In other words, we've finished the coaching session. What's the one simple thing that you can do right now that'll move you in the right direction? All right. Now, what I want you to do is turn the page over. So in other words, there might be writing on the back, or it might be blank. Obviously, I don't know, but it doesn't matter. In other words, I want you to turn over the answers so you can't see the answers. Now, I want you to give yourself a score out of 10 on your level of optimism in resolving the problem. Now, don't go back and look at your previous score. That's why I asked you to turn the page over. I want you to write down a score now on a scale of 1 to 10. 10 is high, 1 is low. All right. Now you can turn the page back over and have a look. And what I'm really interested in here is whether your score went up, that's your level of optimism score, went down, or it stayed the same. And in the chat box, or wherever you can record this, yep, chat box or Q&A, whatever works for you, I'd like you to, I don't want to know what it is, obviously, but what I'd like you to do is to identify your first score and second score. In other words, you might have rated it 5 when I asked initially, and then after I've done the session, you might have rated it a 7. All right, so Susie is saying a 5 to an 8. And that's a significant improvement. So the question that I should ask, and I won't ask Susie because you've given me that information. I don't want to find out what it is that I'm coaching you on. But the significant point there is it's gone up. And the question that I have to ask, and I want you to think about it, is why? Why did the score go up? Because really, if you think about it, all I did is ask 12 questions. Didn't do anything else, just asked 12 questions. I mean, goodness me. And to go from a 5 to an 8 is a pretty significant improvement in terms of your level of optimism. Now, has that resolved the problem? No. But if your optimism is now at an 8 out of 10, there's a reasonably good chance that you'll probably be able to tackle that problem because you feel very confident about what you need to do and how you need to go about it. All right, so you can see that this works extremely well. Don't know, everyone's a bit shy today by the look of it. Anyway, maybe you think I'm going to pick on you. But now I've seen people score not necessarily go up. I've seen people score stay the same. I've even actually seen people score go down. But I must say this, it's very rare. Most people's score goes up, maybe not to the extent that we saw there from Susie, but it certainly goes up. Now, the question is why? And I think a lot of the answer really is that I helped you think through the problem. I gave you a structure. I gave you an opportunity to look at the problem rationally. So now just think about this for a minute. If I've never met any of you, but if there's one of you who actually, I can improve your level of optimism from a 5 to an 8 without having even met you or even talk to you. In other words, I just asked you a bunch of questions. Then think about how powerful that might be remotely when you've got the person in front of you on the screen. Doesn't take any great rocket science or anything like that. The questions are very easy. In fact, in the slides we're going to see, you'll see the questions that can be asked and how you'd go about doing that. You'll also probably recognize that the coaching conversation probably took no longer than 8 to 10 minutes. Now, that's 8 to 10 minutes invested online, where we probably might spend 45 minutes waffling on about the problem and not really looking at the solution. So you can see that there's a huge amount to be gained by using this. So let me go back to my slides and we will have a look at this in a little bit more detail. Okay, let's move on to the next session. So you can see from the piece of paper that you wrote this on, G stands for grow. G stands for goal, I should say. R stands for reality. O stands for options. And W stands for way forward, or sometimes people might say what next. So anyone can remember GROW. But the key to the success of this coaching methodology is the fact that you are not answering people's questions. Now, when you answer people's questions online, say you have a check-in and people are asking you a bunch of questions and you answer them, that's not coaching. So coaching is when you're actually getting them to do the heavy lifting and getting them to think about the problem. So GROW. So let's just look at a very brief video clip of this and just see how it works. And then we'll come back and talk about it in a bit more detail. Sorry, before we do that, John Whitmore, bit of a history lesson here. John Whitmore was considered to be the initial instigator of GROW in 92. And he put it together, and it really did take off. It just really grew it grew its own momentum. And of course, it's probably now one of the most popular coaching techniques in the world. I mean, it's not the only one, of course, but it's certainly popular and it's easy to use. And that's the reason I like it, is it's easy to use, it's easy to remember, and it's very effective. Three good reasons why I like it. So let's have a look at a short video clip and just see how it works. I'll just let this play. It goes for a couple of minutes, but it'll give you a sense of how it might apply in the workplace. Okay, I'll just stop sharing for a moment while we talk. Okay, so look, that's the nuts and bolts of it. And I do want to emphasize to you, the hardest part of grow is not the G, which is the goal, because obviously you can ask people what they're trying to achieve. The R is not the hardest part, which is the reality. In other words, the barriers are in the way. The hardest part is the O. You know why? I'll tell you why. Because O stands for options. And guess what? You probably know what their options are. You probably know how to resolve their problem. Remember, this is the people that you're working with. Now, just because you know the answer to that, you might think to yourself, well, why wouldn't I just give them the answer? Why would I bother going through all of this? Just give them the answer. But have you ever had a case where you've actually given people an answer and they haven't listened to you? I'm sure you have. We've all been there. So you give people a good dose of common sense and give them the answer, and you find that the person does the exact opposite. So what's going on there? Well, obviously, they don't own the answer. The answer is your answer, not their answer. So the secret there is for you to actually ask them to come up with the options. So bite your tongue until it bleeds and let people work it out for themselves. You might say to me, well, what happens if they're completely off track? Well, I can guarantee to you they won't be. But even if they do get a bit lost, of course, you can sort of guide them a bit, but you mustn't give people the answer, because the moment you give someone the answer, that's not coaching anymore, is it? That's just spoon feeding. And then so that's the hardest part. The W is where the rubber meets the road, and that is, what do you need to do next to get this moving in the right direction? So that's extremely important. So it works brilliantly. Now, you could even literally get away with asking 4 questions in a coaching session. What are you trying to achieve? What's stopping you? R. What are your options? O. And what do you need to do next, which is W. And you're done. It'll save you so much time, because normally what happens is we sit there listening to someone raving on, sometimes for 45 minutes, about some problem or and you're sitting there thinking, I'm supposed to listen to this. But the truth of the matter is, it's not really effective, because what they're talking about is not really something that they can resolve. So the whole idea is to talk about something, some tangible things that are actually getting in the way. So it works extremely well. All right. So if you've got any questions or whatever, go to the chat box and just type them in, or comments or whatever. Happy to talk about those as well. Let's go back to the methodology and have a look at how this works. So here are some. Now, of course, as you know, you get these slides. You'll be getting a copy of the slides and the recording after every session. So you'll actually have a chance to go through these. And these are 4 questions. Now, when you look at these questions, if you think, I don't feel comfortable asking that, well, don't ask it. I mean, obviously, I'm not. You put it in your own way. Okay. So, for example, what are you trying to achieve? Someone might say, what's your ideal outcome? And someone might say, what are you trying to achieve? Whatever it might be, it has the same impact, because what you're really asking the other person to do is to identify what the ideal outcome will be. All right, that's pretty simple, really. So now, what happens if someone comes? What happens if you're online with someone and someone says to you, and then they start launching into some negative circumstance? Well, what you do is you stop them, and you actually say to them, stop, before you go on, let me ask you a question. What's your ideal outcome here? So what you try and do is get them on the front foot around the G, or the goal. And then later on, after they've responded to that, because quite obviously, if they can't give you an ideal outcome, then, that's a problem, isn't it? They need to articulate what it is they're trying to achieve. And then when you get to the R, you can say, what's the main barrier getting in the way? Just like I asked you. Now, by asking what the main barrier is, you are, you're not asking them to tell you all the excuses under the sun and everything else. You're just asking what the main barrier is. And that in itself is very, very powerful. So that's the first step. The second step, once you get through that, is the R for reality. And there again, I won't read them out for you. You can read them, but there are 4 questions for you again. Now, again, if you don't feel comfortable asking any of those questions, then don't ask them. But the idea is to ask people what is getting in the way. And it's obvious, because obviously something's getting in the way, because if it wasn't getting in the way, it wouldn't be a problem. I mean, it wouldn't be something that you'd need to coach someone on. So you've got to talk about the reality. You've got to talk about the barriers. Now, I should point out that this model is used for workplace situations, general work and what people are doing remotely. I would not go into personal issues. I would not go there unless you are a trained psychologist. I would not go there. So I would just stick to work-related things. Now, that does beg the question, if people raise things during these check-ins with you, and they're of a personal nature. Most organizations these days have got a employment type support system that they can use. You can steer them in the right direction there, and I suggest you do. But you're not there to try, you're not a social worker or a psychologist. You're not there to try and resolve their problems for them. All right, so when you get to the R, you've now created a distinction between where they want to go, right, and where they are now. So you've kind of got this kind of, you've got these bookends of a bookshelf, if you like. So when you get to the O, and as I said earlier, this is the hardest part, you actually then are looking for, and you'll notice that the word options is plural. In other words, when someone puts an option on the table, and when you discuss this online with someone, and of course you can do this on the phone or face-to-face, whatever. But when someone puts an option on the table, don't just dive in and say, righto, well, that might work, let's do that. Actually say to the other person, okay, what's your plan B? Or what might be another option open to you? And then, of course, and the reason for that is you're building up people's capability and capacity by giving most problems have got several solutions, I'm sure you're aware of. Now, where the rubber meets the road, as I said before, you get to the way forward. And this is where you will, basically get a bit of a plan of action together. So you really put it on the person to what's the next step is ultimately what this is about. So when we get off this Zoom call, if you're on a Zoom call with one of your colleagues, you might say, what's the first thing you need to do once we get off this call? And then and look, it's a nice question to ask. And I didn't ask you this one because it wasn't really relevant in our case, but look at the last question there. What support will you need from me and others? That's a nice question to ask. How can I support you? And if you do the GROW model, they're probably likely to say, well, you already have by helping me think through the solution to the problem. All right, so that's GROW. It's not hard to use. No prizes for guessing what your homework is, none whatsoever, but I guess you probably know. But let me just, before we sort of launch into that side of things, let me just say, when can you use GROW? Okay. Now, I've suggested to you, you need to have regular check-ins. Now, not every check-in you have will be a coaching session. That I should make clear. What I should say is that some of those sessions may indeed open themselves to the opportunity for coaching, in which case you can use GROW and pull it out of your kit bag and use it there and then. So if you're working from home or you're working from work, wherever you are, if you've got a whiteboard or something close by, just write the letters GROW on the board. And what that does is it forces you to remember next time somebody raises an issue with you, and don't go straight in and resolve it. It can be used in between check-ins, obviously just normal, on the phone conversations. You can use it for skill development as well. If you've just completed a project or your team member has, why not debrief on it in terms of asking, some questions around grow. When someone comes to you remotely with a problem that they want you to resolve, obviously this would be ideal. So it's put it in your kit bag. It works extremely well. And I just wanted to say that your homework is, ta-da, is to practice grow every chance you get in the next fortnight, because we meet again every 2 weeks. And I would like to think that you will have under your belt by the time we meet again a grow coaching session done and dusted. You might think that's a big ask, but I can guarantee to you in the next 2 weeks, there will be oodles of opportunity for you to apply the grow model. Okay. So that's your homework. I'll hold you to account for that next time. And next time we meet, we're going to be talking about this topic here about giving feedback remotely, which is always an interesting topic because you're not there at the time, are you? I sort of touched on this in Unit 1, you might recall, but I wanted to spend a bit more time and dedicate a whole session to giving feedback. All right, so let me just stop sharing. All right, so that's it from me, folks. And you've got your homework, you've got the grow model, how it works. You just need to apply it now. And so homework for week 1, of course, was to get your one-on-ones sorted out. I've now given you a framework, the 5 conversations framework to build on. And I've also now given you a coaching methodology, which I know works extremely well. So good luck with that. And we will catch up in a fortnight. So thanks, everyone. All the best for the rest of the week and have a great weekend. Thank you and goodbye.